It's great to see so many familiar faces, both on the panel and out here for representing states and other intermediary organizations. So I've been hearing a lot today that folks are interested in funding, so I figured, maybe we should talk a little bit about how philanthropic partnerships work and how we approach collaboration in the field. I've been loving all of the presentations today. It seems like whoever coined those 3 Ps, I think it was Scott, but it could have been someone else, and just everyone's like running with it. So I love it. I'm gonna try not to be as over the top on that. So let me introduce my panelists here. I've got a few questions for them to warm up the audience, but really I'm hoping that this will be a dialogue. We had some really great and actually really hard questions last year, and I'm wondering if that was because they were like anonymous and people could air their grievances and with funders. So feel free to write them on index cards and pass them up here, no judgment. We think that there's always opportunities to learn more about how we as funders engage with various organizations in the field, and we want to make sure that this panel is valuable to you all. So I am going to integrate the introductions for my panelists here in my first question. So many of you may recognize me from last year when I also moderated this panel on philanthropic funding and our approach to the work. And I wanted to make sure, as I was prepping with my colleagues for this year's panel, that we didn't just rehash the same questions, but we also want to balance the fact that we have returning folks who have heard about some of our work before with newer individuals in newer states that are trying to understand the landscape. So I've got 2 questions, but not each of our panelists will respond. So last year, I started off the panel by asking about why data infrastructure is important, or why do you invest in it? And I want to make sure that our newer funders, George and Kumar, are able to provide within their responses an understanding of their foundation and context. But for our Strata representatives and Lumina representatives here, I'm going to ask them a slightly different question about how things have changed. So let me start over here with Kumar from Schmidt Futures. And I want to know, how does your foundation approach investment in data infrastructure, and why is it important?
Can folks hear me? Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for having me on this panel. So it's a great question. Let me give a little bit of background. So my background is as a policymaker. I served in the Obama administration working for the President's Science Advisor for just under 8 years. I got a chance to work with a lot of foundations during that time, which was surprising to me because that's not written in any most policy jobs. But actually, one of the things you find when you work inside the government is that government operates at scale, but struggles with getting things started. And so often foundations can play a useful role on the next idea, the new idea, the, hey, can you host a meeting and then we can just come to it type collaboration. And so when I left the administration at the end of the Obama administration, I started working with Eric Schmidt, more popularly known as the former CEO of Google. He was transitioning off being CEO of Google, and that collaboration actually led to the creation of a new organization, Schmidt Futures. It principally has a pretty broad mandate, which is kind of how can advancements in science technology have the broadest public good. And so the organization over time has built a lot of programs on climate science, on advances in AI, on advances in bio. My purview as the organization went from a team of 7 to a much larger team is basically a couple of things. I do a lot of our policy work, interactions with government. I do a lot of our partnerships work, interaction with other philanthropic entities, and then a lot of our social mobility programs to think about how advancements in science technology can help increase economic outcomes. A focus on education in part. I think where data often comes up is that as a government nerd, I spent a lot of my time actually on just when do things break or why isn't something happening? And so I think a lot of our work that ends up being in data doesn't start with what's our data program or our data strategy? It just starts with, we're trying to make progress in a particular area. And then we say, well, what might be an example of why this is not happening? So for example, early in the pandemic, we stood up a program specifically on benefits access. This is early days of the Biden administration. We're living through the pandemic. There's a huge amount of policy that started to rev up on trying to provide emergency aid on a whole bunch of things, rental assistance, on economic aid and everything else. Now, having lived through the Obamacare fallout when the website didn't work, and I don't know if there are new websites that don't work. I don't know if you've heard, but so this is like a big problem. Government fails at execution, especially when it has to move fast. So one of the things we did was we stood up a program specifically on, hey, let's think about the machinery of where benefits access programs might fail, and specifically try to go partner with states. So we went and we partnered with Connecticut. Like that program wasn't designed as a data program, but one of the big things that the team found when they started to do work at the state level was that, actually in a number of states, everyone gets kicked off the rolls in re-enrollment and have to reapply, and that was causing a 50% churn. Leaders in the state didn't know that like the fact that they weren't automatically re-enrolling everybody was causing this huge program churn. We also called up people like Kathy Stack, who I knew. So I've been on the Kathy Stack fan club since 2009, everybody. So, we could have t-shirts for like, when did you first work with Kathy Stack? So, and so one of the things I said to Kathy was, hey, like what are things that you wish government was taking on, but might be easier to get started on the philanthropic side, such as data access, such as what is the role of auditors, such as how do we build better collaboration between the government and states and localities. And so, we're like a long time funder of lots of different things that Kathy has come up with, partly because it sort of fits in this middle space, and Kathy's one of our innovation fellows as a result. So I would say that the short answer is that like we're very hard to navigate if you said, hey, I looked at your website, I'm going to apply to this program, and this is the exact place where data is. But one thing that we've tried to do is just build it into all our programs to say, often if you don't think about what is the underlying strategy as to where data will fit in, it's probably going to fail. And so you should probably think about that built in.
Thanks, Kumar. That really resonates with some of what Jen Engel was mentioning earlier today about when data falls by the wayside within a strategy, it tends to be neglected. I'd like to go over to George over here for him to introduce himself and talk a little bit about how Robert Wood Johnson Foundation approaches data infrastructure.
Hello, I'm George Hober. I'm a Senior Program Officer at Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. The foundation has been supporting data work since its inception. So it's not a hard sell to, why do you fund data work? Well, it's a critical input for any effective program. It's a critical input for building knowledge. It's a critical input for anything you want to do. So, we believe in a data-informed society. So, but with the question being, how do we fund infrastructure? Well, we don't. We see that as the point of government. So we end up funding infrastructure through very project-based ways. So, for example, trying to think of one that's relevant to the type of data you work with, we would have a program called MADE, which is Making Anti-Racist Data Ecosystems, and it's funded through the Diploma Foundation. But the point there would be to fund basically to explore the question of the types of data that you have, are they useful to the community organizations and nonprofits that we're interested in and their needs? Do they have demands that your data could match? And so a program like that would explore that question by giving funding to a nonprofit that would be responsible for bringing together public sector departments and agencies to be like, what is your inventory of data? Can we open this up? What is useful? What can be shared? So that's one project that demonstrates a way you could fund infrastructure through that. But the goal is very much to see whether or not the resource you have actually aligns with a different audience and its needs. Or, of course, we fund research. So, the theme that I'm in, we call them themes, which would be like academic departments, is the healthy communities theme. So it's conditions of place and how they impact health. So, and it's very hard to have impact evaluations on place-based interventions. And on that, I mean place-based interventions being, you imagine like a large-scale mixed income housing development that is put in a neighborhood of concentrated poverty with wraparound services for education and employment. And do the data that you might have, is that a useful resource for evaluating those interventions? So that would be another one, but it ends up being project by project. And earlier in the keynote, you heard that, yeah, foundations don't really have a targeted data strategy. And I think we're the same way. We don't have a targeted data strategy that would say, we focus particularly on IDS. We focus particularly on administrative data. It's kind of spread out. That said, I'll wrap up by saying, I did hear some other needs that people express, like, oh, like we just want technical assistance on data sharing agreements, legal services. We fund organizations that provide those services. So we do support data infrastructure in those ways with some of the things that aren't exactly infrastructure costs, but the activities that you need to stand up what you do. We do have a network of grantees that provide those services. That said, I understand we're also not the most transparent foundation. Even the things I've referenced, like that MAID project is like, oh, it's just a call for proposals that came out and it goes to, what, 4 communities? I think the way to work with the foundation is a frustrating process of one-on-one identifying program officers and harassing them. It's really, but that is—
Clearly we're very self-aware.
Yeah, that's not ideal. I wish that would change because it also puts me in the odd spot of always saying to, and I probably said it to people in this room, like, you won't hear from me in about 6 months to a year, but it is good to keep checking in and doing this because that is a way to also, you might have particular needs for supporting your work, data infrastructure in your states, and that is a way to actually crack what is a very, it's not a transparent sector of philanthropy.
Yeah, that really resonates, George. Both the fact of, hiding out at conferences because there's that person you haven't talked to in a year and you're kind of like, ooh, you asked for money and I don't know what to do anymore. So that resonates. But also the part that you were talking about that Stephanie Walsh brought up earlier, which is that a lot of funders are overly focused on that impact layer. And then we have what happens at the beginning, the data governance, the data sharing agreements, the technical assistance about how to work with others. And then what happens at the end, that translation of policy, of the information into policy or impact. And so really great to hear that Robert Wood Johnson is really focused on some of those upstream development pieces, because there are funders like myself at Gates that do have the opportunity and the availability to invest in data infrastructure. Following that thread, I'm going to turn to John Furr. So his colleague, Stephen Murray, was on the panel last year when I asked this more original question. And so I wanted to spare many of you the original story here and pivot a little bit with John and Chris to ask a little bit more, what has changed in the way your foundation approaches data infrastructure? And what I'll just say is that Strata is one of our unique colleagues in the field that is building and establishing a distinct data strategy. So hearing this different approach relative to the other funders on the panel, I think is really valuable. John? And introduce yourself too, because I don't have bios here.
Hi everyone, so I am John Furr, Senior Vice President and Chief Data Ecosystem Officer at Strata. I joke and mostly took the jobs to have the cool job title, but the actual fact that Strata has a role of Chief Data Ecosystem Officer, so a executive level position that's just focused on the data ecosystem, is truly reflective of the priority that Stephen Murray, our board, our leadership is placing on data work. So Strata focuses only on post-secondary to employment. We care a lot about states. My career for 2 decades was working in state government, state agencies. George Putnam did work within the state of Illinois context on data sharing initiatives. So that's kind of where much of our love is for the work, like is being done through Coleridge, to bring state data together to really power insight. So Last year at this conference, I was in the audience. I hadn't yet started at Strata. Stephen was talking about some really big ideas, but they were still a ways off. But now these things are actually happening. They're coming to fruition quickly. So I want to talk about two of those things that are occurring. One is that we are publishing the State Opportunity Index on April 2nd. And this is a very ambitious research project. Strata is fairly unique in the philanthropic world. We've got a great, strong research team that's been working with a number of stakeholders to be able to assess state progress on strengthening the connection between post-secondary education and employment. And on the report that we'll be writing on in just a few weeks is reviewing how states are doing in 5 priority areas. So around clear outcomes and data, quality coaching, affordability, work-based learning, and employer alignment. So for the clear outcomes related work, and again, that's work that I've been leading, we went through a process to survey all 50 states plus the District of Columbia, interviews and research to really be able to assess how states are doing around key aspects for their data infrastructure, including our states collecting key data elements around non-credit data, enhanced wage records. Is the data being integrated across post-secondary and the employment systems? Are data being provided out to key stakeholders in various ways? And what's the actual impact on policy work? So this report is coming out for a baseline. And first of all, I want to thank you for those in the audience that responded to the surveys and the emails that I send out. I know that that's adding to your plate, but we really appreciate that feedback. But I definitely want to be clear, Strata's goal is not to just put out this report and say some states are here, some states are there. It's really to support states with progress. And what I'm hoping and wanting to turn and work with tables like this and rooms like this is to truly understand with each state, what are the 2 to 3 to 4 areas within the framework that we're putting out that you're wanting to make progress on? And how can we help you make that progress, both through our support, our funding resources, our partner resources, collaborating with the other funders that are at the table. So please, I hope this is the start of a conversation with a number of the state partners about next steps for that work. So the second area that Stephen spoke to, and the room applauded, like you were all so excited about this, is that the need that we need to address this data void for non-degree credentials, that we just do not know enough in our country about who was participating in non-degree credential programs and what are the outcomes that are associated for these programs, especially for those that are offered outside of the post-secondary systems, for the certification program, professional certificate for workforce training. Well, we're taking a massive swing at this, and we are launching a new nonprofit affiliate. This has been authorized as one of Strata's biggest investment ever to create a new national data trust to work with the issuers of those credentials at scale, through data sharing agreements, to bring in that data through the data trust, and to be able to support the provisioning out of that data, not only for those programs to support the continuous improvement efforts for them, but to partner with states on how they can understand that data. So as you're thinking of credentials of value, how do you understand not only credentials within your post-secondary system, but outside as well? So if that's an area that your state is thinking about and addresses challenges you have, let's talk. We'd love to find ways to partner as we're moving forward with this effort. We're hiring the leaders for this effort right now. We'll be launching this over the coming months and really going more public once we've got these 4 partnerships in place for the first part of the work. But really excited about that effort and being able to work with Coleridge, being able to work with the states that are here as we're moving that forward.
Super helpful, John, and definitely a great application of cross-sector data sharing and the types of groundwork that Coleridge and NASWA and SHIO and others have laid for those partnerships to really be fruitful as you and your team continue that effort. So definitely encourage folks to take John up on it, especially as a new foundation, they may be open to some of your strategic alignment conversations. I'm going to switch gears to a more tenured organization in the field, Lumina Foundation. Chris, as we were prepping, you were highlighting an upcoming strategy reflection period for Lumina. Would love for you to follow up on last year and think a little bit about how is your foundation thinking differently about data infrastructure and what are the implications as you enter a strategy reflection period?
Great, thanks. It's nice to be with all of you. Thank you, Nicole. I'm here from Lumina Foundation. For those of you who don't know, we're a private foundation based in Indianapolis, focused on making education beyond high school available to all. A little background about Lumina is in 2000, USA Funds sold off its loan portfolio and created the Lumina Foundation. And so we spent the first 8 years kind of learning what it was to be a foundation. And in 2008, we set up broad, ambitious goal that we stuck with. Others have set goals along the way, but we've stuck to it, and have been focused on increasing educational attainment in the country to 60% by 2025. At that time, one state had an attainment goal. Right now, 49 states have an attainment goal. So that might be the state that you're in right now. You're welcome. And so I say that jokingly, but also true. We found this driven a lot of great conversations. As you can imagine, 2025 is about 8 months away. So it creates an interesting time within the foundation as we currently sit here. Part of my job as the strategy director for data and measurement is I'm responsible for maintaining and updating Stronger Nation, which is our online data visualization tool that helps keep us accountable to ourselves and to each other about the progress we're making. We have an explicit focus on racial justice and equity too, because we look at the attainment data and realize that adults who identify as Black, Hispanic, and Native American are farther behind than everybody else. It's not that Asian and white Americans don't count, but when we look at the data, that's really where we tend to put our focus, because we need to make sure that they are as successful as they can be, those populations who have been underserved. So how does that fit into our work? Well, right now we're thinking about what happens after 2025, right? We are a foundation that has been committed to a time-limited, quantifiable, numerical goal. That's who we are. We don't waver from it, unapologetically pursue it. Whether or not we get to 60% or not, we're not too sure. But we know a lot of progress has been along the way, and it's been done by all of you, right? Attainment in the country has increased about 15%. Think about that. Of a country of 300 million people, about 15% increase in attainment because of the work that happens every day in your states, in your communities, in your colleges. And that's something worth celebrating and accomplishing. As we look towards the future, I'll tell you right now, sitting here today, our board has not set a goal for the future. I do not know what is going to happen in 2025 and moving forward. And of all the people who should know in the foundation, I'm one of them because I have to run the data to show it, right? So I have ideas and inclinations. I don't think we're going to be moving away from attainment, but does it evolve? Does it look different? We're not too sure. So at this point, what's different than a year from ago today is we're still thinking and charting our future and what that looks like. Once our board sets a goal, then our leadership team sets a strategy in a number of years and how much money we get and for how long. And then I have to come up with a strategy memo to implement the strategy direction that meets with the board's goal. You see the kind of stress I'm under right now? This is why I'm happy to be here with all of you. Let's just think, I'll see you at the reception, we'll catch up, it'll be fine. And it's actually, I started making notes of ideas that all of you had, actually on my phone, about what I might fund. So like, when somebody asks you on a panel, what should funders do? Take the time to answer the question. So we're still looking towards the future and looking forward to more questions you might have for us.
I love that, Chris. I also love the distinction that you can make around Lumina of sticking to an attainment goal or sticking to a goal, putting something in a stake in the ground, and really driving the work forward even if the goal itself was not attained. That it's like, 40 plus states now have an attainment goal when you started with one? 49. Yeah, I thought I didn't want to get too close to be over, it's like Price is Right rules. But anyway, so I just think that there's a lot here that funders do that isn't always about the shiny objects. Sometimes it's about getting into the weeds and doing that hard work year over year to promote and build awareness. And as Jen mentioned earlier today, demand for the types of work that you all are doing. And that's where we really try to navigate together. Now, one thing the audience may have taken note of is that everything seems a little bit different. Oh, and sorry, I should probably say, Gates funds data. We do national cross-sector, cross-state work like this, what we have here. We also invest in building statewide exemplars, so going deep in a state to really build out and strengthen P20W systems. And those are two strategies that are much more about place, right? One is going deep in a state, another one's looking across states. Our third portfolio, which we call Innovation with Research and Development, I like to call that the place where we don't care about the location of the work, but we care about the problem. So privacy and security. It doesn't matter what level you're working at. You need to care about it. You need to work on it. And we've heard that repeatedly already this morning. Similarly, interoperability, which I'm sure keeps many of you up at night, especially those CIOs that I know have joined us, right? That's a painful place. And we have a learner information framework that invests in that. But back to the point I was making, which is that we 5 representatives of our foundations are all talking about things that we do a little bit differently. We may have some overlap in education, we may have a little bit of data work, but everyone's doing something distinct. And so what I wanted to do is make sure we were also staying accountable to all of you. So one of the questions that stuck with me after last year's panel was someone from the audience, and this is why I was saying, write your things down on index cards. We will come back to them. They framed it as, how can philanthropy better align? The quote was, often in states we get initiative fatigue, where the same people are tapped for multiple committees or initiatives that are similar. It turns into a competition of differentiating a project when really it's quite similar to what another funder is funding. Given that one of the themes today is around collaboration and partnership, I wanted to make sure that we as funders could return to this question again and continue to live into and vocalize some of the ways that we work together to break down some of those additional initiative fatigues that you see in the field. I'll start by just underscoring that the Democratizing Our Data Challenge is one of those efforts which has brought and galvanized so many of you to the table by bringing funders together to generally align on an overarching framework and placing funds within that bucket. It allows states to propose projects that aren't just solely aligned within a single strategy. So that's one example. I am going to see who's interested in showing the receipts of how we've been working together on the panel. I can't see everyone at once. Chris is going to start us off, and then I'm going to call in Kumar. So I'll warn people here that they should be coming up with their answers.
Sure. Hello, everybody. So I think Lumina, we don't have as much money as everybody else. We still have a decent amount, right? And so we try to help
Just
drive
a few
the conversation.
million.
Look at money. I went to college on the Pell Grant. I got to tell you, it's a disorienting experience to be a grant maker. That aside, we'll talk about that at the reception. I think what's interesting is sometimes we get this spur up and innovate, and then sometimes I think for a funder we have to realize maybe our time in that space might be done, but then how do we do handoffs? And I think we do a pretty good job with handoffs along the way, where we try to as funders we talk, believe it or not, we pick up the phone and call each other. So I just had a grantee, they're I want to do this thing, it's this much money. I'm I don't have that much money, but call so-and-so, and so-and-so did, and they funded it. I'm yay, money from another foundation. I'm not trying to be the shiny object to get credit, I just want the good work to happen, right? And so, streamlining things like Kathy's idea of that's a sustainable investment. If we can get rid of all the red tape and you guys can just share data more easily, that's what excites me, right? I get excited about that type of work, and building upon the work I look forward to reading about the OMB package or the guidance letter that's coming out. And then, or things Johnny is going to do amazing work with the new thing. I won't say the name of it. It was coming out, right? But
I noticed he didn't say the name, and I was
yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's their news to share, but but my colleague before us, Holly Zanville, did a lot of really good work connecting the data with IRS and the Student Clearinghouse and industry certifications. And there's a census paper from NAM about the National Association of Manufacturers that really proved, as a proof point, that can happen. It takes a lot of work and a lot of resources when you do it, and Strata's has been a partner, they're going to do it, that's exciting, we're applauding them. So what you might not realize is we might not collaborate at the same time on the same grant, but I think that we do, in my efforts and the efforts of my peers I've spent today talking to Cole about other projects, we do try and find ways to work together as much as possible. So those are a couple of examples of how.
And Kumar, some ways that we're collaborating in real time?
Yes. I think the idea of philanthropic collaboration is a very common idea. Funders like to keep up with each other. My wife always jokes to me, it's you go to a lot of funder things, right? So it's not that there's not conversation. I think there's a couple of key things. I think one is, one very useful type of collaboration is there's always a subset of funders that are deep nerds on a particular work stream, and then other sets of funders who are passersby. They've got a really wide portfolio. They don't spend a lot of time at the program officer level. So one type of really useful collaboration is collaborations where the folks who are really deep on it meet often, but then they invite lots of other funders who might have much wider portfolios. So we are part of the Data Funders Collaborative. That has a number of folks where the program officers who actually invest in this area show up. But one of the key ideas behind it, I think Joshua's here, is to then share that with funders who might have broadly an economic mobility strategy, or broadly a healthcare strategy, or broadly just is an interesting idea strategy, And for those, I think pre-selection and sharing ends up mattering. I think that's one. And the second one is just that funders can do a lot to help all of you get introduced to other peers. So it's one of the requests that I coach most often, which is people will say, like it's so hard, and I'll be like, let's just brainstorm names. Have you talked to this person? Oh no, I haven't talked to that person. Okay, I can introduce you to that person. Have you talked to this person? Oh no, and so a funder throwing a coffee on your behalf, a dinner on your behalf, doing introduction, those things go a long way because often if it doesn't fit within their strategy, but they are like, well, I could actually sort of pay for it out of this other account, but they'll say that to the peer funder, and like, hey, we might be able to get this going in this way, but they feel awkward saying it to you because it feels way too tactical and you're trying to just do the work. And so that, so those are the two most common ways I would say. And then, I think for individual projects, the one watch out I would say is there are funders who are very sensitive on brand and they want their name in lights. And I actually think the best collaborations are funders that don't care, paired with funders that do care, because then it's like a very easy. So some funders I work with are very brand forward, and other ones are actually doing 90% of the funding, but would rather not. But they're like fine being listed, but they do not want a big amount of comms presence. And so just being aware that people come with very different orientations towards how much they want to be present in the work visibly, and like on Eric's side, he's like, my philosophy is, it's like the movie credits afterwards, that's like when your name should pop up. And so that's a very different orientation. It just makes our lives easier. But, we understand that there's lots of different ways people approach that.
That's totally true. And so Kumar was mentioning the Data Funders Collaborative. We collectively have a website now. Yay! And Josh Marland is over there. He coordinates the efforts if you want to learn more or just get a link to the website. Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is also in it. And that's one of the ways that we as funders have seen that our different approaches to data infrastructure could be better served if we were coordinating and coming together to talk about those issues and then identifying areas where no one funder may be able to invest, but collectively, because we're thinking about broader impact, there are opportunities. So happy to talk more about that offline. Typical with most things, we don't typically take unsolicited proposals, but do know that if you're thinking about an idea already, chances are that your funder is thinking about where to shop that around elsewhere to make sure that the work continues, even if it's not within a particular strategy. So we have about 12 minutes left. I have one question that I'll ask a few folks to answer, but in the meantime, would encourage folks to approach the podium with any questions you have. So the other piece of the theme for today is innovation. It's all the rage. I appreciated Robert's comments earlier of like, AI and Gen AI are not the same thing, and this is an audience that totally knows that, so hooray. So I wanted to kind of take that thread a little bit further around the funding piece, right? So oftentimes when we're talking about the work that funders do, we'll hear, I've said it myself, that we fund shiny objects, right? And it becomes really hard to sustain that work. And I really want to understand, given that innovation can be in the DNA of a funder, how are my colleagues here approaching that? What do you think about the current state of the field, especially with newer tools coming out? And then where do you think the field needs to think differently about innovation, especially from a sustainability perspective? I'm going to start here with John, and then we'll see where the conversation goes.
Great. Well, I'd like to start with one way that I'm thinking differently in this space with a bunch of fellow data nerds, just to see, to what extent this starts to resonate with you. I think states for a long time have built interactive dashboard resources, really thinking those will be the front door for members of the public to access the data assets that they have. But I think that's changing. So with AI, more and more, I think, as we think about students and families, for faculty members, for policymakers, they're going to use a natural language query AI platform to answer their questions. It's not going to be on the dashboard resources. They're going to be asking questions to that platform. And that platform is going to be providing responses based on whatever data it's able to find. And I think that kind of shifts how we need to think about our role with providing data assets out to members of the public. It might not just be a high quality dashboard. It might be around how do we ensure the data that those tools are using are as robust and accurate and accessible for the AI robots to find them and to use them, right? And so that's kind of a different framework how we need to think about data. And would love for the great thinkers, the great data minds within this room for us to think together in the world for AI, when people are asking these platforms and it's getting whatever data and returning it, how do we need to think about providing our data so it's accessible to members of the public that are using those tools rather than maybe going to the dashboard website that we built and made pretty. So that's the provocation for us to talk more over drinks.
Super helpful, John. Also in our prep work, you talked a lot about skills articulation and how some of the newer models that are faster and more comprehensive could potentially take that issue that's been around for like 15, 20 years and really make some demonstrable progress there. So hopefully folks in the room are thinking about that and would love to hear ideas as you're coming up with questions. I'm going to pass it over to Chris because Chris had something provocative to say when I was prepping with him, and I wondered if you would share or reflect a little bit on it here for the panel.
I can only remember. So for me, innovation maybe take a little bit of a different form. And I have this analogy right now of like a spring cleaning, right? We have so much good data that people before us have spent decades building. Like I worked in the state system in Florida for 5 years, and Jay Pfeiffer built the system starting in 1999 that I had the luxury to use in very important ways. So for me, innovation is maybe not doing something new, but innovating and maybe doing something we're currently doing a little bit better and more efficient, right? I think Stephanie talked before about some work. Some others have mentioned some work about like, can we just standardize some data elements? Can we do some things so we can spend more time at Coleridge convenings coming together and learning from each other? And but it's hard for people to change things that they've already built, right? So we're stuck in this tension point of like, let's innovate and do something new. No, you put so much pressure on us. But okay, let's change what you have. No, I can't change what I have, and it just drives me a little bit batty, to be honest, right? So an example is, and they're doing good work, and we're making progress, though. Like Department of Labor people in the room. I know some UI people in the room. All right, love you guys. And Allison Forbes, CRC, good to see you. You're over there. Shout out to my labor people. If you look at federal regulations and guidance memos, that every state has to have occupational projections at the state level, and they also have it at a sub-state level, right? You all know this, it's like exhausting. But every state gets to determine how it wants to do its sub-state projections its own way, right? And so it's like, can't we just all do it at like a workforce board region or something? Because that'll facilitate and allow John to build his data tool so much faster that can help people understand supply and demand gaps. That's not like a major change, right? It's saying, I'm gonna do a sub-state projection at the workforce board region to align with the data later. But for understandable reasons, flat funding for 12 years from the federal government and all the reasons that go into it, it's the people in the room aren't the ones that are responsible for this. But like, how do we think about innovating in a way that makes what we do better and links to better together? So when it comes to getting meetings like this, it's about how do we use the data to better tell the story, rather than me coming and saying like, let's build a brand new data system from scratch. You know what I mean? And build some tool that has funding, sustainability concerns, personality, has to maintain and all that kind of fun stuff. So when I think about innovation, I try and think about how do I make your lives easier and better and allow the brilliance that's in the room to shine rather than to dull it with a bunch of paperwork.
Totally resonates with me. I'm wondering if we have any questions from the audience.
Can I answer the question on innovation?
Of course, George.
Well, only because it's the main reason I'm here. It's not a huge innovation. I'm not going to say anything with AI or anything like that. But Robert Johnson Foundation does have a data strategy. We wouldn't say it's a data strategy. It's like an information system strategy. And we're a health funder. And when we look at the information systems that public health departments use as their central resource for their work, especially for addressing social determinants of health, we find those data sources to be extremely dated, unuseful. They don't provide timely data. They're not necessarily, well, I'll give you an example. The availability of life expectancy data right now, the most recent, is, I believe, 2020. It's as if a pandemic has not happened. So there are major deficits in that information system that I feel a data resource like the ones you all pulled up can be approached in a way with a creative eye to say, those measures around employment or those measures around whatever you have, can be translated into the useful measures or concepts that are valuable for public health. And so that's the way we kind of think of innovation. It would be really nice for that underfunded governmental agency to not rely upon either case reporting that isn't interoperable or on large national surveys the CDC has to produce that have a 2 to 3 year lag. What are the sources of more timely data? And I hear all of you talk and I think of like, oh, that's a measure for status that should be analyzed with like opioid addiction, mental health issue. And so I want to see how health data continues to feed into your systems to complement data around education, around workforce, and actually create a different communications or information system that public health could draw off of. That's the big innovation we shoot for, which might not be very innovative, but we think that's more useful than a survey like, I hope no one from CDC hears it, but like a CDC survey that's like, here are your health conditions. That has to change a little bit.
Yeah,
Now,
getting deeper than ACS.
Exactly, which everyone acknowledges they rely upon, and they also acknowledge that it's a bad data source for their purposes.
I see we have a question.
Just following up on George's comment, we're seeing opportunities within our state with the expanded social determinants of health Z codes that CMS is putting out, and the needs, for at the healthcare provider level, and how a lot of what we do in this room is very beneficial because we have the social determinants of health, and that's really bringing some worlds together. Have you seen any prominent examples from other states of kind of leveraging this opportunity with the Z code expansion to kind of bridge these domains?
Examples from other states around the social determinants of health. I didn't hear totally your question, but.
Well, CMS recently added 90 additional social determinants of health Z codes, on educational attainment, employment, all the barriers of employment that we're very familiar with, and it's really driving a lot of opportunities for connecting like our SLDS and our health information exchange and things like that, worlds that were somewhat separate before. And I was just wondering if you've seen promising
Other
practices
states.
there from other states. And
George?
Have we seen other states doing that? I think seen localities with really, I can't think of really good state examples. And I'm sorry, but like localities of like Allegheny County always jumps out as an integrated data system that has a health focus and is very
I see
good.
some knowledgeable nods here, yes.
Yeah, but I also think like a part of what you raise is like a lack of, it's not sometimes it might not be a data challenge, it's just like a political will connection challenge too that is also happening. We're aware of that. But yeah, off the top of my head, I would have to, I could think of more local examples, but I would actually.
Well, it looked
reach
like
out to
Kumar
you
may
first.
have had some thoughts to add.
The only thing I was going to add is things I've learned from Kathy, which is just that part of what's driven at the state and local level, the challenge is that federal policy doesn't align the way it spends on health data with the larger data system. So what that means is that when health data systems update, they don't necessarily have to integrate with education, workforce, and other data management systems. So it leads to both some of the mismatch that George said, right? Like, hey, this is lagging, but even to the extent that it's up to date, it doesn't actually connect. And so on the ground, you can't actually build these social determinants in any reasonable way. So there is this sort of federal connectivity piece, which involves the way partly the US government sort of, when it collects and sort of updates its health requirements, needs to be doing this other stuff as well.
Super helpful and ties into why we may be having more examples come out of localities than at the state level. Well, I realize our time is up. If you have other questions for our panelists, we'll be around. I think most folks are going to the reception. And I'll just share that some of my panelists are also interested in knowing what we're doing that's helpful to you all. Because as much as we can continue to advocate and invest in the things we've done previously, knowing what is beneficial to our stakeholders is always a value add in making the case going forward. So thank you. A round of applause, I suppose, for my panelists.